I call the member for Terrigal, the outstanding government whip.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr Assistant Speaker. And look, I welcome the opportunity to speak on the Music Festivals Bill this evening. This bill is all about ensuring that patron safety comes first. Indeed, the most significant responsibility of any government is to keep its citizens safe. Our government's number one priority will always be to keep people safe. I want to say from the outset, Mr Assistant Speaker, that I'm very disappointed indeed that this bill needs to be brought before this House at all. Between November 2018 and the end of February 2019, the New South Wales Government worked with industry to develop the new Music Festivals licence. While a small minority of the community had concerns regarding the misperception of undue pressure on music festival operators, it was important that measures were put in place to keep patrons safe at these events. Music festival operators owe a duty of care to their patrons, no matter what their age, Mr Assistant Speaker, their families and to the broader community itself. A new licensing scheme commenced on the 28th of February 2019. Following commencement, the Independent Liquor and Gaming Authority wrote to 14 music festivals to indicate that New South Wales Health and New South Wales Police provide advice that there were elevated health risks associated with their events and that these events would be subject to a music festival licence, including an enforceable safety management plan. Last month, we saw Labor, the Greens and the Shooters in the other place overturn those very regulations, and that is why this bill is before us today. And that was a disgraceful act, Mr Assistant Speaker. This summer season is upon us already, Mr Speaker, and it's critical that appropriate safety measures are in place before music festivals are held. Many events are, of course, safe, but the huge risk of death or injury at some means the government must act. As I said before, our government's number one priority will always be to keep people safe. This bill will require high-risk music festivals to prepare a safety management plan in consultation with New South Wales Health, New South Wales Police and the Independent Liquor and Gaming Authority. Now, I repeat, Mr Assistant Speaker, these are for the high-risk festivals. Part 2 of this bill specifies that the following factors will be considered by the Independent Liquor and Gaming Authority when deciding whether a music festival constitutes a high-risk festival. And these will include 1. Any advice from the Health Secretary or the Commissioner of Police. 2 relatively experienced people in my books, Mr Assistant Speaker. 2. Whether a death has occurred in the state on a previous occasion at the music festival or in connection with the music festival in the last 3 years. Quite a reasonable request. 3. Whether a prescribed event occurred at a music festival or an event related to a music festival for which the music festival organiser was the organiser in the 3 years immediately preceding the date on which the proposed music festival is to start. Again, a very reasonable request. And 4, any submission made to the Independent Liquor and Gaming Authority by the music festival organiser about the reasons the proposed music festival is not a high-risk festival. So these are pretty reasonable requests. And these regulations were put in place and proved successful, although they were taken away by those in the other place not that long ago in a disgraceful act. This requirement to create a safety management plan does not apply to every single music festival in New South Wales. Of the more than 90 festivals in New South Wales, only 11 were classed as high risk. And among these 11, the Lost Paradise on the Central Coast is one of them. Now, Mr Assistant Speaker, I also need to make it very clear. We've had a lot of comments in this chamber today about music festivals closing down. I need to make it very clear. From when those regulations were introduced, not one single festival in New South Wales was closed down. Not one. So we hear comments being passed in this chamber about music festivals walking away from New South Wales or closing. Well, since these regulations were introduced, not one festival across the entire state has closed down. And I, like so many, were devastated by the loss of 5 lives last summer at music festivals. And I, of course, extend my heartfelt condolences to the families of those young people who tragically died as a result of a drug overdose. One of these lives, of course, was lost at Lost Paradise. I cannot begin to imagine the pain a family would be going through when their son or their daughter going to a festival for a few days to only never return home. And that is what we have to focus on, Mr Assistant Speaker. That is why our government is so steadfast and resolute in ensuring we do everything possible to avoid a repeat of that year, to ensure that no other families have to go through the horrific experience of losing a loved family member due to an overdose at a music festival. This bill will provide the tools needed to avoid another summer like last year. Mr Assistant Speaker, of course I am very concerned that if Labor and the Greens and the shooters get their way again across the other side of this building and refuse to support this legislation, we could see hospital admissions, serious illness, or at worst, a death as a result of that. And this should never be in this situation where this bill has to come forward. The regulations were already in place. The experience of local police on the Central Coast, who I have spoken to at length about this, is that festivals, like Lost Paradise, are absolutely awash with drugs. And holding a music festival over a New Year period, when temperatures are at their highest and the police resources are stretched to their limit, could be a potential recipe for disaster. And look, I know the member for Wyong's in the chamber and have a great amount of respect for him as a colleague. Now, I know that if he hasn't already, he probably would have also spoken to the local police about their concerns with regards to music festivals on the Central Coast. So high-risk music festivals are not safe places, Mr Assistant Speaker, and the introduction of a requirement for a safety management plan aims to improve safety. Let me emphasise that the vast majority of events are managed responsibly. However, the deaths that have occurred over the last year and the extreme risk of more occurring has compelled this government to act, and act they did. This approach is about ensuring that festival operators have the right mix of health and harm reduction measures in place to make sure that if something goes wrong at their event, they can respond quickly and effectively. Yes, some operators will need to lift their standards. Yes, some operators will need to think more carefully about what medical personnel they have on site in case something goes wrong. Mr Assistant Speaker, if that is what it takes to prevent or reduce the risk of serious illness or death, then it is absolutely must be done. As I've said before, Mr Assistant Speaker, the number one responsibility of any government is to keep its citizens safe. I am proud to be part of a government that takes this responsibility so seriously. Mr Assistant Speaker, I'm urging those in the other place to do the right thing. When this legislation is presented before them, I would urge them to vote in favour of this bill as it is. It is disappointing that some people are still opposed to having a clear and easy to understand framework that holds operators accountable for what happens at their events. This bill provides absolute certainty for music festival organisers. The bill clearly specifies the roles and responsibility of festival organisers. The Independent Liquor and Gaming Authority, New South Wales Health and the New South Wales Police and other stakeholders are aware of this. This bill is the way to reduce the risk of death or serious illness at music festivals this summer. As the Premier said last week, the festival season is now upon us and urgent action is really required on this issue. And before I commend this bill to the House, again, I want to reiterate some of the things I've listened to, and I've been listening to this debate all day. To hear the mistruths being put out about festivals leaving New South Wales and festivals closing down and festivals walking away from this. As I said, these regulations were put into place a while ago, and not one single festival has walked away or closed its doors in New South Wales. And if making these festivals safer is such a concern to these organisers, they need to have a very good long look at their business model, because their number one and most paramount duty is the care of their patrons. And that is what they need to focus on. And I would say, if you want to talk to a key stakeholder, talk to the women and men of the New South Wales Police Force, especially those on the Central Coast, who have to spend 4 days at a music festival doing the best they can to make sure nobody dies. And that is a very clear indication of a very key stakeholder. And they have serious risks, and they themselves fully support the regulations this government put in place, because that helps save people's lives, Mr Assistant Speaker. So with that, I commend this bill to the House.
Speaker.
Well, I thank the member for Terrigal. I now